Weep Not Child by Ngugi wa Thiongo, narrated by Adamu Abdul-Majid. Part 1. The Waning Night. Chapter 1. Inyokabi called him. She was a small black woman with a bold but grey face. One could tell by her small eyes full of life and warmth that she had once been beautiful. But time and bad conditions do not favor beauty. All the same, Inyokabi had retained her full smile, a smile that lit up her dark face. Would you like to go to school? Oh, mother, Njoroge gasped. He half feared that the woman might withdraw her words. There was a little silence till she said, We are poor, you know that. Yes, mother. His heart pounded against his ribs slightly. His voice was shaky. So you won't be getting a midday meal like other children. I understand. You won't bring shame to me by one day refusing to go to school? Oh, mother, I'll never bring shame to you. Just let me get there. Just let me. The vision of his childhood again opened before him. For a time, he contemplated the vision. He lived in it alone. It was just there, for himself, a bright future. Aloud he said, I like school. He said this quietly. His mother understood him. All right, you'll begin on Monday. As soon as your father gets his pay, we'll go to the shops. I'll buy you a shirt and a pair of shorts. Oh, mother, you are an angel of God. You are, you are. Then he wondered, had she been a magic worker? Or else, how could she have divined his child's unspoken wish, his undivulged dream? And here I am, with nothing but a piece of calico on my body, and soon I shall have a shirt and shorts for the first time. I thank you, mother, very much. He wanted to say more, but Njoroge was not used to expressing strong feelings in words. However, his eyes spoke all. Again, Inyokabi understood. She was happy. When Kamau came home in the evening, Njoroge took him aside. Kamau, I shall go to school. School? Yes. Who said so? Father? No, it was our mother. Has our elder mother told you the same thing? No, brother. You know I am being trained as a carpenter. I cannot stop the apprenticeship. But I am glad you're going to school. I am, oh, so glad. But I wish you two will come. Don't you worry about me. Everything will be all right. Get education. I'll get carpentry. Then we shall in the future be able to have a new and better home for the whole family. Yes, Njoroge said thoughtfully. That's what I want. And you know, I think Jacobo is as rich as Holland because he got education. And that's why he takes his children to school because, of course, they have learned the value of it. It's true, but some, you know, must get learning and others this and that trade. Well, you see, I was thinking that if both of us could learn and become like John, the big son of Jacobo, it would be a good thing. People say that because he has finished all the learning in Kenya, he will soon go far away too. England and Burma and Bombay and India are all the same places. You have to cross the sea before you reach there. That's where Mr. Hollands comes from. Yes, I wonder why he left England, the home of learning, and came here. He must be foolish. I don't know. You don't understand a white man. There was only one road that ran right across the land. It was long and broad and shone with black tar, and when you traveled along it on hot days, you would see little lakes ahead of you. But when you went near, the lakes vanished to appear again a little farther ahead. Some people call them the devil's waters because they deceived you and made you more thirsty if your throat was already dry. And the road which ran across the land was also long and broad, had no beginning and no end. At least, Few people know of its origin. Only if you followed it, it would take you to the big city and leave you there while it went beyond the unknown, perhaps joining the sea. Who made the road? Rumor had it that it came with the white men, and some said that it was rebuilt by the Italian prisoners during the big war that was fought far away from here. People did not know how big the war had been because most of them had never been to a big war fought with planes, poison, fire, and bombs. Bombs that would finish a country just like that when they were dropped from the air. It was indeed a big war because it made the British worry and pray, and those black sons of the land who had gone to fight said it was a big war. There was once another big war. The first one was to drive away the Germans who had threatened to attack and reduce the black people to slavery, or so the people had been told. But that was far away and long ago, and only old men and middle aged men could remember it. It was not as big as the second one because then there were no bombs, and black people did not go to Egypt and Burma. The Italian prisoners who built the long tarmac road had left a name for themselves because some went about with black women, and the black women had white children. Only the children by black mothers and Italian prisoners, who were also white men, were not really white in the usual way. They were ugly, and some grew up with small wounds all over their body, especially around the mouth, so that flies followed them all the time and at all places. Some people said that it was a punishment. Black people should not sleep with white men who ruled them and treated them badly. Why should the white men have fought? Ah, you could never tell what these people would do. In spite of the fact that they were all white, they killed one another with poison, fire, and big bombs that destroyed the land. They had even called the people to help them in killing one another. It was puzzling. You could not really understand because, although they said they fought Hitler, ah, Hitler, that brave man, whom all the British feared, and he was never killed, just vanished like that. Hitler too was a white man. That did not take you very far. It was better to give up the attempt and be content with knowing the land you lived in and the people who lived near you. And if this was not enough, you wanted to see more people and hear stories from far and wide, even stories from across the sea, Russia, England, Burma. You could avoid the vigilance of your wife and go to the local town Kipanga. You could, for instance, tell her you were going to buy some meat for the family. That was something. All right, go and don't loiter in the town too much. I know you men. When you want to avoid work, you go to the town and drink, while we, your slaves, must live in toil and sweat. I'll come back soon. See how you turn your eyes. You cannot even look at me in the face because you know you'll go and stay there the whole day. Now, now, just you trust me to come back soon. The idea of trusting you. There were many ways from Ahua village to Kipanga. You could follow the big road. It passed near the town. Or you could follow a track that went through a valley into the town. In a country of ridges, such as Kikuyu land, there are many valleys and small plains. Even the big road went through a valley on the opposite side. Where the two met, they had it as it were embraced and widened themselves into a plain. The plain, more or less rectangular in shape, had four valleys leading into or out of it at the corners. The first two valleys went into the country of the black people. The other two divided the land of the black people from the land of the white people. This meant that there were four ridges that stood and watched one another. Two of the ridges on the opposite sides of the long side of the plain were broad and near one another. The other two were narrow and had pointed ends. You could tell the land of the black people because it was red, rough, and sickly, while the land of the white settlers was green and was not lacerated into small strips. Kipanga was built in this field. It was not a big town like the big city. However, there was one shoe factory, and many black people earned their living there. The Indian shops were many. The Indian traders were said to be very rich. They too employed some black boys whom they treated as nothing. You could never like the Indians because their customs were strange and funny in a bad way, but their shops were big and well stocked with things. White settlers, their wives and children, often come to the Indians and bought all they wanted. The Indians feared Europeans, and if you went to buy in a shop and a white man found you, the Indian would stop selling to you and trembling all over would begin to serve him. But some said this was a cunning way to deceive the white woman because when the Indians trembled and was all, yes, please, Mem Sahib, anything more, the women would be ready to pay any price they were told because they thought an Indian who feared them dare not cheat about prices. Black people too bought things from the Indians, but they also bought in the African shops, which stood alone on one side of the town near the post office. The Africans had not many things in their store, and they generally charged higher prices, so that, although the Indians were not liked and they abused women using dirty words they had learnt in Swahili, people found it wiser and more convenient to buy from them. Some people said that black people should stick together and take trade only to their black brethren. And one day, an old woman said, let Africans stick together and charge very low prices. We are all black. If this be not so, then why grudge a poor woman the chance to buy from someone, he be white or red, who charges less money for the things? In the Indian bazaar, black people mingled with white people and Indians. He did not know what to call the Indians. Was he also a white man? Did he too come from England? Some people who had been to Burma said that Indians were poor in their country and were too ruled by white men. There was a man in India called Gandhi. This man was a strange prophet. He always fought for the Indian freedom. He was a thin man and was always dressed poorly in calico stretched over his bony body. Walking along the shore, you could see his photograph in every Indian building. The Indians called him Babu, and it was said that this Babu was actually their god. He had told them not to go to war, so that while black people had been conscripted into the army, the Indians had oddly refused and had been left alone. It was rumored that the white men in Kenya did not like them because they had refused to go to war against Hitler. This showed that the Indians were cowards. The Africans were inclined to agree to this idea of Indian cowardice. The African shops were built in two rows which faced one another. The air was full of noise, and near the meat shop there was a strong stench of burning flesh. Some young men spent all their time doing nothing but loitering in the shops. Some could work the whole day for a pound of meat. They were called the lazy boys, and people in the village said that such men would later turn to stealing and crime. This thought always made people to shudder because murder in cold blood was a foul thing. A man who was murdered was forever accursed in heaven and earth. One could recognize such boys because they were to be seen hanging around tea shops, meat shops, and even in the Indian bazaar, waiting for any errand that might earn them a day's meal. At times, they called themselves the young Hitlers. The barber shop was a famous place. The barber himself was a short brown man with hair very carefully brushed. He was very funny and he could tell stories which made people laugh. The barber knew everybody and everybody knew him. He was not called by any other name except the barber. If you said you did not know who the barber was or where his shop was, people at once knew that you were either a stranger or a fool. A fool in the town's vocabulary meant a man who had a wife who would not allow him leave her lap even for a second. How could anyone not afford to call unto the barber who knew how to sing and dance and could speak English? I learnt it all during the big war, and it was all that big. The barber let the clippers go flick, lick, lick, lick. Everyone stands expectantly by waiting to hear about the big war. The barber takes his time. My man, you would not ask that if you had been there. What with bombs and machine guns that went boom, crunch, boom, crunch, throw, throw, and grenades, and people crying and dying. Ah, I wish you had been there. Maybe it was like the first war. Ha ha ha, that was a baby war. It was only fought here. Those Africans who went to that one were only porters. But this one, turn your head this way. No, this way. Yes, that's it. This one, we carried guns and we shot white men. White men? Yes, they were not the guards we had taught them to be. We even slept with their women. Ha! How are they? Not different. Not different. I like a good fleshy black body with sweat. But they are, so thin, without flesh, nothing. But it was so wonderful too. Well, before you started, you thought it was wonderful. But after, it was nothing, and you had to pay some money. Are there many, many who are willing to sell? And that was in Jerusalem of all places. People around became amazed. You don't mean to say that there's such a place as Jerusalem? Ha ha ha! You don't know. You don't know. We have seen things and places. There now, you're ready. No, wait a minute. Flick, lick. That's all right now. You look smart. You had been to Jerusalem? It is getting late. I must go. I must buy something for those at home. Me too. Told my woman that I will come and buy meat for them. Now it's almost dark. This woman. Oh yes, woman. And with these words, Ngoto made his way through the crowd into the open. He always loves to listen to the Baba. Somehow, the talk reminded him of his own travels and troubles in the First World War. As a boy, he had been conscripted and made to carry things for the fighting white men. He also had to clear the dark bush and make roads. Then, he and the others were not allowed to use guns. But in the Baba's war, that was something. His own two sons had gone to this one. Only one had returned. And the one who had returned never talked much about the actual war, except to say that it had been a terrible waste of life. Ngoto bought 4 pounds of meat, but they were bounded into 2 bundles, each of 2 pounds. One bundle was for his first wife, Njeri, and the other for Iyokabi, his second wife. A man had to be wise in these affairs, otherwise, a small flaw or apparent bias could easily generate a civil war in the family. Not that Ngoto feared this very much. He knew that his 2 wives liked each other and were very good companions and friends. But you could not quite trust women. They were fickle and very jealous. When a woman was angry, no amount of beating would pacify her. Ngoto did not beat his wives much. On the contrary, his home was well known for being a place of peace. All the same, one had to be careful. He went across the fields. He did not want to follow the big road or the valley because those two were long. He wondered what Iyokabi and Njeri would say. He had not kept his word to be back soon. But then, he had not intended to come home soon. His wives were good women. It was not easy to get such women these days. It was quite true what the Baba had said about a fleshy black body with sweat. Look at that Mem Sahib, in whose husband's employment he was. She was so thin that Ngoto at times wondered if the woman had flesh at all. What did a man want such a wife for? A man wanted a fat woman. Such a woman he had in Njeri and in Yokabi, especially when he married them. But time had changed them. He wondered if the Baba had quite told the truth. That bit about going with a white woman. Who could believe that a white woman like Mrs. Holland could make herself cheap enough to go with black men for money? Yet, one could believe anything these days. He wondered if his son, Boro, had done such a thing. Of course, it was something to have a son who had. But the thought of buying was not at all nice. And if they had nothing extra, well, it was better to have a black woman. How quick you have been! Yokabi welcomed him. You know, men are always very quick, added Njeri in the same sarcastic tone. The two women usually stay together to hasten or shorten the night. Ngoto was inwardly pleased. He knew that when they adopted that tone, they meant to be friendly. I went to the barber, as if we could not have used a razor blade to clear off your hair. Well, times are changing. As Buana Holland says, you want to be a modern white man. You are two troublesome women. Take this meat first. Inyokabe took a share, and Injeri hers. Now, it's time for me to go and disturb the young people, said Injeri. All the sons of Ngoto, with other young men and women from Mahua Ridge, were in Injeri's hut. They usually went there to shorten the night. At such times, Injeri will leave the young people, and she will go and sit with Inyokabi. When they went to Yokabi's hut, she too would do likewise, leave them, and go visit Injeri. But some nights, the young people wanted to hear the stories from Ngoto or from the women. At such times, they would be in the same place. Tell Injorige to come and show his new cloth to his father. Iyokabi told Injeri as the latter left. Ngoto was proud that his son would start learning. When anybody now asked him whether he had taken any of his sons to school, he would proudly say, yes. It made him feel almost equal to Jacobo. When is he beginning? On Monday. Does he like the idea? He looked happy. She was right, and Jorige's heart had felt like bursting with happiness and gratitude when he had known that he, like Wahaki, the daughter of Jacobo, would start learning how to read and write. Weep not, child. Chapter 2. On Monday, Njoroge went to school. He did not quite know where it was. He had never gone there, though he knew the direction to it. Onwahaki took him and showed him the way. Onwahaki was a young girl, and Njoroge had always admired her. Once some head boys had quarreled with Onwahaki's brother. They had thrown stones and one had struck her. Then the boys had run away, followed by her brothers. She had been left alone crying. Njoroge, who had been watching the scene from a distance, now approached and felt like soothing the weeping child. Now she, the more experienced, was taking him to school. Onwahaki was a daughter of Jacobo. Jacobo owned the land on which Ngoto lived. Ngoto was a Muhoi, and Njoroge had never come to understand how his father had become a Muhoi. Maybe a child did not know such matters. They were too deep for him. Jacobo had small boys and one big boy and big daughter. The big daughter was a teacher. Her name was Lucia, and Njoroge always thought Lucia is a nice name. All his sisters had ugly names, not like Lucia. The other boys were rough. They laughed at him and made coarse jokes that shocked him. His former high regard for schoolboys was shaken. He thought that he would never like to make such jokes, and Yokabe, his mother, would be angry if he did. One boy told him, "You are a Unjuka." "No, I am not a Unjuka," he said. "What are you?" "I am Njoroge." They laughed heartily. He felt annoyed. Had he said anything funny? Another boy commanded him, "Carry this bag. You are a Njuka." He was going to take it, but Wahaki came to his rescue. "He is my Njuka. You cannot touch him." Some laughed, others sneered. "Leave Wahaki's Njuka alone. He is Wahaki's boy. He will make a good husband. A Njuka to be a husband of Wahaki. A Njuka is a Njuka. He must carry my bag for me." All this talk embarrassed and confused him. He did not know what to do. Onwahaki was annoyed. She burst out, "Yes, he is my Njuka. Let any of you touch him." Silence followed, and Njoroge was grateful. Apparently, The boys feared her because her sister was a teacher and Wahaki might report them. The school looked a strange place, but fascinating. The church, huge and hollow, attracted him. It looked haunted. He knew it was the house of God, but some boys shouted while they were in there. This too shocked him. He had been brought up to respect all holy places, like graveyards and the bush around the fig trees. The teacher wore a white blouse and a green shirt. Njoroge liked the white and green because it was like a blooming white flower on a green plant. Grass in this country was green in wet weather, and flowers bloomed white all over the land, especially in Njahi's season. Njoroge, however, feared her when 2 days later she beat a boy. Whack! Whack! Bring the other hand. Whack! 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 The stick broke into pieces. Njoroge could almost feel the pain. It was as if it was being communicated to him without physical contact. The teacher looked ugly while she punished. Njoroge hated seeing anybody being trashed, and he was sorry for the boy, but he should not have bullied the Njuka. It was on that day that Njoroge learned that Njuka was the name given to a newcomer. Njoroge usually kept alone. He always reached home earlier than the other boys of the village. He did not want to reach home in the dark. Bad boys walk slowly after school, for if they reached home early, they would be asked to help in the evening chores. When they reached home, they said, Teacher Lucia or Isaac kept us late. But sometimes they were found out and they were beaten. Njoroge did not like being beaten. After 3 weeks, he made his mother angry. It was the fault of Wahaki. She had asked him to wait for him so that they might go home together. After all, their homes were near each other. Besides, she said she feared certain boys. Njoroge was pleased. Together they took the road slowly, chatting. When they reached the top of the hill that was near their village, they sat there and began playing. It was sweet to play with a girl, and especially if that girl came from a family higher up the social scale than one's own. She looked more precious because rare. She was small and delicate. He soon forgot that the sun was sinking, while he and Wahaki competed in throwing stones to see who could throw the farthest. And that was the time his mother had come and seen them. Nyokabi had watched the sun slowly sink home without her son appearing. She had become worried about him, and with an anxious heart had come to look for him. Njoroge was not beaten, but he knew too well that she was annoyed. She did not want her son to associate with a family of the rich because it would not be healthy for him. Njoroge thought it was all in Wahaki's fault and thought her a bad girl, and promised himself that he would not play with her anymore or even wait for her. He came home one day and found his mother shelling some castor oil seeds from their pots. She often did this, and when she accumulated enough after a number of months, she sold them at the markets. Mother, let me help you. Go and do your schoolwork first. And Yokabi was proud of having a son in school. It made her so happy and light-hearted whenever she saw him bending double over a slate or recounting to her what he had seen at school. She felt elated when she ordered her son to go and do some reading or some psalms. It was from the greatest reward she would get from her motherhood if she one day found her son writing letters, doing arithmetic, and speaking English. She tried to imagine how the Hollands woman must have felt to have a daughter and a son in school. She wanted to be same, or be like Julian. Julian was the wife of Jacobo, and she must surely have felt proud to have a daughter who was a teacher and a son who would probably be flying to foreign parts soon. That was something. That was real life, provided he or she could one day say, Look, I have a son, as good and as well educated as any you can find in this land. You did not need to be educated to know this. Her mother's instinct, that yearned for something broader than that, which could be, had her social circumstances and conditions saw this. That was why she had impressed on her husband Ngoto the need for one son to be learned. Her other son had died in the big war. It had hurt her much. Why should he die in the white man's war? She did not want to sacrifice what was hers to other people. If Njoroge could now get all the white man's learning, will Ngoto even work in Hollands, and especially as the wife was reputed to be a hard woman? Again, would they as a family continue living as Ahoy in another man's land? A man who clearly resented their stay. A lot of motives had indeed combined into one desire, a desire to have a son who had acquired all the learning that there was. These days, she even thought that if she had much money, she would send her married daughter to school. All would then have a schooling that would at least enable them speak English. Mother, you must tell me all those stories again, he implored her as he knelt down to help her in spite of her rejection of his offer. She murmured as she blew some rubbish away from the seeds she had in her hands. She paused for a moment and smiled. You cunning young man, is that why you offered to help? Eh? Mother, you must, he said earnestly. Why must I? She asked carelessly as she resumed her work. I was told to tell a story today. The story you told us about Irumu came to mind, but when I stood in front of the class and all eyes were fixed on me, I was afraid. He paused. I lost the story. He finished dramatically in a tragic tone, as if such incidents really happened. A man should never be afraid. You shall scratch your head for another story. You have many. Or do your elder mother and myself waste our time telling you all those stories about the tribe? I tell you, mother, I forgot all of them. He pleaded with such great vigor that Inyokabi was forced to laugh. And Njoroge could be very serious about certain things, but now he too laughed. He loved his mother so when she laughed. She had rich milk white seed, which time had done nothing to harm. Ni wiga. All right, I'll tell you some in the evening. Oh, I forgot. Your mother wants you to run for your brother. Now do that at once. He went into the hut, threw down his slate, and rushed out. Njoroge, Njoroge, he came back. Don't you take off your school clothes? He felt ashamed. He should not have forgotten. He went back to the hut and took off the school clothes. He put on the old piece of calico. This too had been part of the contract. It was necessary to preserve the clothing intact for as long as possible. The path he followed passed just below Wahaki's house. The houses were hidden by a big hedge of growing fir trees that surrounded the household. You could see the corrugated iron roof and the wooden walls of imposing building through an opening or two in the hedge. Njoroge had been there out in the courtyard a number of times when he and other children went to collect money for picking python flowers for Jacobo. The place looked like an European house, and Njoroge was always overawed by the atmosphere around the whole compound. He had never been in a big building, and he was always curious to know what the inside looked like. But he had once been in the kitchen. The kitchen was a separate building, a round mud-wall grass-thatched hut that was used for all the cooking. It was also where the servants slept. He had been to the kitchen on Christmas Day when many children, who usually wait for Jacobo, were invited for a party by Julian. She was a fat woman with a beautiful round face and naughty eyes, but she was kind with children, and on that occasion she had bought much bread. How appetizing it all looked as it lay on a tray nearby, forming a shade-pointed gleaming white hill. Njoroge's mouth had watered, and he had a lot of difficulty in swallowing the saliva for fear of making some audible sound at the throat which would betray him to his hostess and her children. But the tragic part of the day's proceedings came when they were all told to shut their eyes for the grace. It was during the grace that one child had made a funny sound which had at once made Njoroge giggle. But no sooner did he begin giggling than he was joined by another who giggled even loudly, till both of them now burst out in open laughter, which in turn caused the long grace to be cut short. The children were hungry. Julian was annoyed and gave Njoroge and all the children there assembled a long lecture. If they, the unfortunate two, had been her own children who had misbehaved. She said quite clearly that they would have gone without a meal for 2 days, but the children would never do such a thing. She had brought them up well to value ustarabu and the rules of good manners. She had concluded her speech by saying that it was her considerate opinion that all children should be brought up as she did hers. Because people, however, did not know this, she never liked her children to associate with primitive homes. Ongoto sensed that the way he had been brought up was being criticized. It was on that day that Njoroge had come to value Wahaki, for after the lecture, she had taken great interest in him, perhaps to soothe his hurt feelings. All this was a long way back. Before Njoroge went very far, he saw her coming along the same path, but from the opposite direction. If he went on, he would meet her. Suddenly, he realized that he did not want to meet her while he had on that piece of calico, which, when blown by the wind, left the lower part of his body without covering. For a time, he was irresolute and hated himself for feeling as he did about the clothing he had on. Before he had started school, in fact, even while he made that covenant with his mother, he would never have thought that he would ever be ashamed of that calico, the only dress he had ever known since birth. He turned to the left and followed another path. All around him was a sloping paritron field that belonged to Jacobo. Below a forest, further down still, were the Indian and African shops, but only a few roofs could be seen. The land belonging to Mr. Hollands was adjacent to the smaller narrow ridge which could be seen on the right. That was where Ngoto, Njoroge's father, worked. Njoroge always passed near there on his way to school. He left the Pariton field, took another turn to join another road he had avoided, and then went into the next field. He could just see Nganga's household. Nganga was the village carpenter. Kamu was apprenticed to him. Ngoto had to pay a huge fattened he-goat and 150 shillings on top. Nganga was rich. He had land. Any man who had land was considered rich. If a man had plenty of money, many motor cars, but no land, he could never be counted as rich. A man who went with tattered clothing but had at least an acre of red earth was better off than a man with money. Nganga could afford 3 wives, although he was younger than Ngoto. He had not been to the first, or indeed the second war, but he was said to be clever, although he was a little bit rough and not quite honest. Everybody in the village took to panga, a jambe, or a knife to him for a repair of their handles. He always repaired broken fences and made tables and beds of all sorts, and he could tell a story. This was considered a good thing for a man. Njoroge had now reached the courtyard when he saw his brother coming. Kamau had just finished his duties. Njoroge was glad when he saw him. Although Kamau was older, they got on well. "Let's go, brother," said Kamau as he pulled Njoroge by the hand. He looked gloomy. "Today you are late." "It is this man." Njoroge thought that something was wrong. It was not often that his brother was so angry. "Is he not a good man?" "Good man? If I didn't know that father would be annoyed after paying all that money, I would stop coming here. I have now been with him for 6 months, yet it was only yesterday that he first allowed me to handle a plane. He was always telling me, 'Hold here, hold there,' and always asking me to watch and note carefully. How can a man learn? By watching without practice. Surely not by sweeping the yard or taking away the rubbish and carrying tools for him. But if I touch something, and and here, Kamau spoke in disgust. His youngest wife actually makes me hold a child, just as if she was an European woman, and I her ayah. Oh dear me, it is such a dirty little thing that keeps me howling. And why don't you tell father?" "You don't know. Father will obviously take Nganga's side, especially on the question on watching, because this is how people used to learn trade in the olden days. They don't realize that things are changing." They kept their silence for a while as they made their way home. In the gathering gloom, the prelude to darkness. Then Njoroge, as if he had suddenly thought up a great question, asked, "But why does he treat you like that? He is a black man." "Blackness is not all that makes a man," Kamau said bitterly. "There are some people, be they black or white, who don't want others to rise above them. They want to be the source of all knowledge and share it piecemeal to others less endowed. That is what's wrong with all these carpenters and men who have a certain knowledge. It is the same with rich people. A rich man does not want others to get rich because he wants to be the only man with wealth. Probably, Njoroge said, impressed. He had never heard Kamau speak so much at length. Some Europeans are better than Africans. Again, Njoroge was impressed. That's why your times hear father say that he would rather work for a white man. A white man is a white man, but a black man trying to be a white man is bad and harsh. Njoroge could not quite follow Kamau, but he pitied his brother and vowed that he would not become a carpenter. The only good thing was education. He tried to change the subject. "Mother would tell us a story." "Oh, was she?" Both loved stories. Storytelling was a common entertainment in their family. Corey, like Ngoto, was a good storyteller and could keep a whole company listening and laughing. Boro, who had been to the war, did not know many tribal stories. He drank a lot, and he was always sad and withdrawn. He never talked about his war experiences, except when he was drunk, or when he was in a mood for resentment against the government and settlers. "We fought for them. We fought to save them from the hands of their white brothers." Then on such occasions, he might talk just a little about the actual fighting, but he very rarely alluded to Nwangi's death. It was common knowledge that they loved each other very much. Before the war, it had always been said that such love between brothers was unnatural and portended no good. Boro, Kori, and Kamau were all sons of Njeri, Ngoto's eldest wife. Njoroge's only true brother was Nwangi, who had died in the war, but they all behaved as if they were of one mother. Kori worked in an African tea shop called Green Hotel. Green Hotel was a very dirty place, full of buzzing flies, while the stench of decay hung in the air like a heavy cloud. But it was a very popular place because there was a violent set. Njoroge looked forward to Kori's homecoming because he brought with him the town's gossip and what was happening in the country. For instance, when Jomo came from Britain, it was Kori who had brought the news home. Home was especially a nice place when all the brothers and many village girls and boys came in the evening and sitting around the fireplace in a big circle, they would gossip, laugh, and play. Njoroge always longed for the day he would be a man, for then he would have the freedom to sit with the big circumcised girls and touch them as he saw the young men do. But sometimes his brothers did not come. Home then was dull, but the mothers could tell stories, and Ngoto too, when he was in the mood. "Our elder mother wanted you," Njoroge said when they reached home. It was already dark, while Njeri was always our or my elder mother. In Yokabi, being the younger wife was always just mother. It was a habit observed and accepted by all. "What does she want?" "I do not know." Kamau began to move. Njoroge stood and watched in silence. Then he raised his voice. "Remember to come back to our hearts. You remember the story?" "Yes," Kamau replied. His voice sounded thin in the dark. Later in the evening, Kamau came to Yokabe's hut. "Tell us the story." "Now don't be troublesome," Yokabe said. "It is a bad woman this. If I had been my father, I would not have married her." Kamau liked teasing in Yokabe. Tonight, his teasing sounded forced. It did not provoke laughter. "Oh, but he could not resist me." "It isn't true," said Ngoto, who just entered the hut. "You should have seen how happy she was when I proposed to her. Nobody could have taken her, so I pitied her. I refused all the young men that wanted me, but your father would have died if I had refused him. Don't you believe a word she says?" Ngoto was given food. He began to eat, And for a time, there was an awkward silence. The children could not joke in their father's presence. And Njoroge broke the silence. Tell us a story. You promised, you know. You children, you never asked your father to tell you stories. Tonight, he will tell you, she said smilingly towards her husband. She was happy. If you all come to my tiangira, I'll tell you one or two. Njoroge feared his father, but it always made him feel good to listen to him. There was wind and rain, and there was also thunder and terrible lightning. The earth and forest around Kirianga shook. The animals of the forest, whom the Creator had recently put there, were afraid. There was no sunlight. This went on for many days, so the whole land was in darkness. Because the animals could not move, they just sat down and mourned in the wind. The plants and trees remained dumb. It was, our elders tell us, all dead except the tender, a violence that seemed to strangle life. It was this dark night whose depth you could not measure. Not you or I can conceive a solid darkness, which will not let the sun pierce through it. But in this darkness, at the foot of Kirianga, a tree rose. At first, it was a small tree and grew up, finding a way even in the darkness. It wanted to reach the light and the sun. This tree had life. It went up, up, sending forth rich warmth and a blooming tree. You know, a holy tree in the dark nights of tender and morning. This was Mokuyu, God's tree. Now, you know that at the beginning of things, there was only one man, Gikuyu, and a woman, Mambi. It was under this Mokuyu that he first put them, and immediately the sun rose and the darkness melted away. The sun shone with a warmth that gave life and activity to all things. The wind and lightning and thunder stopped. The animals stopped wandering and moved. They no longer mourned, but gave homage to the Creator and Gikuyu and Mambi. And the Creator, who is also called Murungu, took Gikuyu and Mambi from this holy mountain. He took them to a country of riches near Siriana, and there stood them on a big ridge before he finally took them to Mukuruwe, Wagatanga, about which you have heard so much. But he had shown them all the land. Yes, children, God showed Gikuyu and Mambi all the land and told them, "This land I hand over to you. O man and woman, is yours to rule and till in serenity, sacrificing only to me, your God, under my sacred tree." There was something strange in Ngoto's eyes. He looked as if he had forgotten all about those who were present. Kamau, Njoroge, Bori, Kori, and many other young men and women had come to make the long hours of the night shorter by listening to stories. It was as if he was telling a secret for the first time, but to himself. Boro sat in the corner. The expression on his face could not be seen. He did not once move, but kept on looking past his father. It was as if Boro and Ngoto were the only two who were there at the beginning when the things came to be. Ngoto too could imagine the scene. He saw the sun rise and shine on a dark night. He saw fear, gloom, and terror of the living things of the Creator melting away, touched by the warmth of the holy tree. It must have been a new world. The man and the woman must have been blessed to walk in the new kingdom of Murungu. He wished he had been there to stand near him in his holy place and survey all the land. Njoroge could not help exclaiming, "Where did the land go?" Everyone looked at him. I am now old, but I too asked that question in waking and sleeping. I've said, "What happened, O Murungu, to the land which you gave us? Where, O Creator, went our promised land?" At times, I've wanted to cry or harm my body to drive away the curse that removed us from the ancestral land. I ask, have you left your children naked? Oh, Murungu, I'll tell you, there was a big drought sent to the land by the evil ones, who must have been jealous of the prosperity of the children of the Great One. But maybe you also, the children of Mambi, forgot to burn a sacrifice to Murungu, so he did not shed his blessed tears that makes the crops grow. The sun burned freely, Plague came to the land, cattle died, and people shrank in size. Then came the white man, as had been prophesied by Munguwa Kibiro, that Gikuyu old seer. He came from the country of ridges, far away from here. Mogo had told the people of the coming of the white man. He had warned the tribe. So the white man came and took the land, but at first not the whole of it. Then came the war. It was the first big war. I was then young, a mere boy, almost circumcised. All of us were taken by force. We made roads and cleared the forest to make it possible for the warring white man to move more quickly. The war ended. We were all tired. We came home, worn out, but very ready for whatever the British might give us as a reward. But more than this, we wanted to go back to the soil and cause it to yield, to create and not to destroy. But, Ongo, the land was gone. My father and many others had been moved from their ancestral lands. He died lonely, a poor man, waiting for the white man to go. Mogo had said this would come to be. The white man did not go, and he died a Mohoi on this very land. It then belonged to Chachira before he sold it to Jacobo. I grew up here, working. Here, Ngoto looked all around the silent faces and then continued, working on the land that belonged to our ancestors. You mean the land that Howland farms? Boro's voice was cracked but clear. Yes, the same land. My father showed it all to me. I have worked there too, waiting for the prophecy to be fulfilled. And you think it will ever be fulfilled? It was Kori who asked this, to break the silence that followed Ngoto's reply. I don't know. Once in the country of riches, where the hills and ridges lie together like lions, a man rose. People thought that he was the man who had been sent to drive away the white men. But he was killed by wicked people because he said people should stand together. I've waited for the prophecy. It may not be fulfilled in my lifetime. But oh Murungu, I wish it could. Someone coughed, then silence. From a corner, a young man tried to make a joke about the coming of the white man and what people thought of his skin. Nobody heeded. He laughed alone and then stopped. For in Njoroge, it was a surprising revelation. This knowledge that the land occupied by Mr. Holland originally belonged to them. Boris thought of his father, who had fought in the war, only to be dispossessed. He too had gone to the war against Hitler. He had gone to Egypt, Jerusalem, and Burma. He had seen things. He had often escaped death narrowly. But the thing he could not forget was the death of his stepbrother, Wangi, for whom or for what he had died. When the war came to an end, Boro had come home, no longer a boy, but a man with experience and ideas, only to find that for him there was no employment, there was no land on which he could settle, even if he had been able to do so. As he listened to this story, all these things came into his mind with a growing anger. How could these people let a white man occupy the land without asking? And what was all this superstitious belief in the prophecy? In a whisper that sounded like a shout, he said, "To hell with the prophecy." Yes, this was nothing more than a whisper. To his father, he said, "How can you continue working for a man who has taken your land? How can you go on serving him?" He walked out without waiting for an answer. Weep Not Child, Chapter 3. Ongoto left early for work. He did not go through the fields as was his usual custom. Ongoto loved the rainy seasons when everything was green, and the crops in the flower, and the morning dew hung on the leaves. But the track where he had disturbed the plants and made the water run off made him feel as if, through his own fault, he had lost something. There was one time he had felt the desire to touch the dewdrops or open one and see what was held hidden inside. He had trembled like a child, but after he had touched the drops and they had quickly lost shape melting into wetness, he felt ashamed and moved on. At times, he was thankful to Murungu for no apparent reason as he went through these cultivated fields all alone, while the whole country had a stillness. almost like the stillness of death. This morning, he walked along the road. The big tarmac road was long and broad and had no beginning and no end, except that it went into the city. Motor cars passed him, men and women going to work, some in the settled area and some in the shoe factory, chattered along. But Ngoto was not aware of anything that went by him. Why had he behaved like that in front of all those children? The voice of Boro had cut deep into him, cut into all the lonely years of waiting. Perhaps he and others had waited for too long, and now he feared that this was being taken as an excuse for inactivity, or worse, a betrayal. He came to the Indian shops. Years ago, he had worked here. That was long before the Second War. He had worked for an Indian who had always owed him a month's pay. This was deliberate. It was meant to be a compelling device to keep Ngoto in the Indian's employment permanently. For if he left, he would lose a month's pay. In the end, he had to lose it. That was the time he went to work for Mr. Hollands as a shamba boy. But at first, he did everything from working in the tea plantation to cleaning the big house and carrying firewood. He passed through the African shops near the barber shop and went on onto the same place where he had now been for years, even before the second big war took his two sons away to kill one and change the other. Mr. Howlands was up. He never slept much, not like Mem Sahib, who sometimes remained in bed until 10 o'clock. She had not much else to do. There was something in Howlands, almost a flicker of mystery, that Ngoto could not fathom. Good morning, Ngoto. Good morning, Bwana. Had a good night? Ndio, Bwana. Ngoto was the only man Mr. Hollands greeted in this fashion, a fashion that never varied. He spoke in the usual abstract manner, as if his mind was preoccupied with something big. It was at any rate something that took all his attention. His mind was always directed towards the Shamba. His life and soul were in the Shamba. Everything else with him counted only insofar as it was related to the Shamba. Even his wife mattered only insofar as she made it possible for him to work in it more efficiently without a worry about home. For he had left the management of the home to her and knew nothing about what happened there. If he employed someone in the house, it was only because his wife had asked him for an extra boy. And if he later beat the boy and wanted him sacked, well, what did it matter? It was not just that the boys had black skins. The question of wanting to know more about his servants just never crossed his mind. The only man he had resisted the efforts of his wife to have sacked was Ngoto. Not that Mr. Holland stopped to analyze his feelings towards him. He just loved to see Ngoto working in the farm. The way the old man tied the soil, almost fondly, and the way he treated the tender young tea plants as if they were his own. Ngoto was too much a part of the farm to be separated from it. Something else. He could manage the farm laborers as no other person could. Ngoto had come to him at a time when his money position was bad. But with the coming of Ngoto, things and his fortune improved. Mr. Howlands was tall, heavily built, with an oval-shaped face that ended in a double chin and a big stomach. In physical appearance at least, he was a typical Kenyan settler. He was a product of the First World War. After years of security at home, he had been suddenly called to arms, and he had gone to the war with the fire of the youth that imagines war a glory. But after 4 years of blood and terrible destruction, like many other young men, he was utterly disillusioned by the peace. He had to escape. East Africa was a good place. He was a big trace of wild country to conquer. For a long time, England remained a country far away. He did not want to go back because of what he remembered, but he soon found that he wanted a wife, and he could not go about with the natives as some had done. He went back home, a stranger, and picked the first woman he could get. Susanna was a good woman, neither beautiful nor ugly. She was too bored with life in England, but she had never known what she wanted to do. Africa sounded quite a place, so she had willingly followed this man who would give her a change. But she had not known that Africa meant hardship and complete break from Europe, she again became bored. Mr. Holland was oblivious of her boredom. He believed her when she told him out in England that she could face a life in the bush. But she soon had a woman's consolation. She had a first child, a son. She turned her attention to the child and the servants at home. She could now afford to stay there all day long, playing with the child and talking to him. She found sweet pleasure in scolding and beating her servants. The boy, Peter, was followed by a girl. For a time, the three, mother, daughter, and son, made home, the father only appearing in the evening. He was lucky that their home was near Nairobi. The children could go to school there. Her pride was in watching them grow together, loving each other. They, in their way, loved her. But Peter soon took to his father. Mr. Holland grew to like his son, and the two walked through the field together. Not that Mr. Holland was demonstrative, but the thought that he would have someone to whom he could leave the shamba gave him a glow in his heart. Every day, he became more and more of a family man, and as years went by, he seemed even reconciled to that England from which he had run away. He sent both children back for studies. Then, European civilization caught up with him again. His son had to go to war. Mr. Holland lost all faith, even the few shreds that had begun to return. He would again have destroyed himself, but again his God, land, came to his rescue. He turned all his efforts and energy into it. He seemed to worship the soil. At times, he went on for days with nothing but a few cups of tea. His one pleasure was in contemplating and planning the land to which he had now given all his life. Susanna was left alone. She beat and sacked servant after servant, but God was kind to her. She had another boy, Stephen. He was now an only son. The daughter had turned missionary after Peter's death in the war. They went from place to place, a white man and a black man. Now and then, they would stop here and there, examine the luxuriant green tea plants, or pull out a weed. Both men admired the shamba, for Ngoto felt responsible for whatever happened to this land. He owed it to the dead, the living, and the unborn of his line to keep guard over this shamba. Mr. Hollands also felt a certain amount of victory whenever he walked through it all. He alone was responsible for taming this unoccupied wilderness. They came to a raised piece of ground and stopped. The land sloped gently to rise again into the next ridge and the next. Beyond, Ngoto could see the African reserve. "You like all this?" Mr. Holland asked absent-mindedly. He was absorbed in admiring the land before him. "It was the best in all the country," Ngoto said emphatically. He meant it. Mr. Holland sighed. He was wondering if Stephen would ever manage it after him. "I don't know who will manage it after me." Ngoto's heart jumped. He too was thinking of his children. Would the prophecy be fulfilled soon? Kwanini Bwana, are you going back too? "No," Mr. Holland said, unnecessarily loudly. "Your home. Home. My home is here." Ngoto was puzzled. Would these people never go? But had not the old Gikuyu seer said that they would eventually return the way they had come? And Mr. Holland was thinking, would Stephen really do? He was not like the other one. He felt the hurt and the pain of loss. That what took him away. Ngoto had never known where the other son had gone to. Now he understood. He wanted to tell him of his own son. He longed to say, "You took him away from me." But he kept quiet. Only he thought Mr. Holland should not complain. It had been his war. Weep Not Child. Chapter 4. At school, Njoroge proved good at reading. He always remembered his first lesson. The teacher had stood in front. He was a short man with a small mustache, which he was fond of touching and fondling. They called him Isaka. This was his Christian name, a corruption of Isaac. The children rarely knew the teacher's surname. Many stories went around about Isaka. Some said that he was not a good Christian. This meant that he drank and smoked and went about with women, a thing which no teacher in their school was expected to do. But Isaka was a jovial man, and children loved him. And Njoroge admired his mustache. It was claimed that Isaka folded his mustache mischievously whenever he was talking to the women teachers. It was a source of constant gossip to the boys whenever they were alone in groups. When the teacher had come in, he made a strange mark on the board. A. This was meaningless to Njoroge and other children. Teacher said, A. Class. A. Teacher. Again. A. One felt the corrugated iron roof would crack. Teacher. Making another mark on the board. Say E. Class. E. That sounded nice and familiar. When a child cried, he said, E. E. Teacher. I. Class. I. Teacher. Again. I. That's the old Gikuyu way of saying Hodi. May I come in? The children laughed. It was so funny the way he said this. He made yet another mark on the board. Njoroge's heart beat fast to know that he was actually learning. He will have a lot to tell his mother. Oh, class. Oh, again. Oh, another letter. Teacher says, you, class, you. What does the woman say when she's in danger? Class. The boys looking triumphantly at the girls. You. There was laughter. Say, you. Class, you. What animal says this? A boy shot up his arm, but before he could answer, the class had burst out a dog. Again, there was laughter and a little confused murmuring. Teacher, what does the dog do? Here, there was disagreement. Some shouted that it said, you, while others simply declared a dog barked. Teacher, a dog barks. Class, a dog barks. Teacher, what does the dog say when it barks? Class, you. From that day, the teacher's name had become You. And Njoroge loved this reading practice, especially the parts about blabbering and laughing and shouting as one liked. At first, when he reached home, he had tried to teach Kamau, but Kamau resented this, and Njoroge had to give up the idea. Onwahaki said to him, why do you keep alone? To avoid me? And Njoroge felt ashamed. He still remembered that day his mother met them both playing on the hill. She had not rebuked him, but a mother's silence is the worst form of punishment, for it is left to one's own imagination to conjure up what is in her mind. Njoroge, however, wanted to appear respectable and dignified in the eyes of Onwahaki. You always come out late, he at last said, rather timidly. They went on together. School was just over for the day. As they walked, they saw birds flying across the fields. She broke the silence. No, I don't come out late. It's you. You try to avoid me. Do your parents beat you? She asked after another silence. No, not often. Only when I do wrong. Onwahaki wondered how this boy could do wrong. Njoroge appeared so docile, withdrawn, and always went home in time. Why do you ask? Njoroge continued. Well, I was thinking that if they don't beat you up, that will explain why you're not afraid of them. Do yours beat you? He asked sympathetically. She looked soft, small, and delicate. Perhaps all girls were naughty. Yes, sometimes. And when my mother does not beat me, she uses bad language, which hurts me more than beating. I fear her. I too fear my parents. He did not want to criticize them in front of her. He always remembered an Indian boy who once gave him a sweet wanting to be friendly. Njoroge had then been with his mother. He was surprised by this act of kindness from an Indian boy because he had never thought that an Indian was capable of such. He took the sweet. He was going to put it into his mouth when his mother turned to him and shouted, "Is it that you have not eaten anything for a whole year? Are you to be greedily taking anything you are given by anyone, even a dirty little Indian?" Njoroge threw it away, but it had hurt him because the boy saw him do this. He both ached and feared to go back and tell him something, but he did not then go. Days later, he went to the same place. The boy was not there. Do you think parents always right? I think so. I don't know. But you sometimes feel you know something inside here. Don't you feel the same way sometimes? I do, he said, not wishing to appear ignorant. They soon forgot their parents and laughed. Sometimes they played. And Njoroge was rather reserved, but the Wahaki was more playful. She picked flowers and threw them at him. He liked this and wanted to retaliate, but he did not like plucking a flower in bloom because it lost color. He said, "Let's not play with flowers." "Oh, but I love flowers." They passed near Mr. Holland's house. It was huge and imposing. It was more grand than which belonged to Wahaki's father. "My father works here." "This place belongs to Mr. Holland's." "You know him?" "No, but my father talks about him. My father visits him and says that he is the best farmer in all the land." "Are they friends?" "I don't know. I don't think so. Europeans cannot be friends with black people. They are so high." "Have you been here to his farm?" "No. I have often come here to see father. There is a boy about my height. His skin was so very white. I think he is the son of Mr. Holland's. I did not like the way he clung to his mother's skirt, a frightened thing. Yet his eyes were fixed on me, a bit curious. The second time he was alone. When he saw me, he rose and walked in my direction. I was frightened because I did not know what he wanted. I ran. He stood still and watched me. Then he went back. Whenever I go there, I make sure I am near my father." "Did he want to speak to you?" "Well, I don't know. He may have wanted to quarrel with me. He is like his father." Njoroge remembered the story Ngoto had told them. He could not tell Wahaki of this. This was to be his own secret. "All this land belongs to black people." "Yes, I've heard father say so. He says that if people had had education, the white man would not have taken all the land. I wonder why our old folks, the dead old folks, had no learning when the white man came. There was nobody to teach them English." "Yes, that could be it," she said doubtfully. "Is your class taught English?" "Oh no, it's only Standard 4 which is taught English." "Does your father know how to speak English?" "I think so." "Where did he learn it?" "In a mission place, Syriana. You will learn English before me." "Why? You are a class ahead of me." She considered this for a few minutes. Then she suddenly brightened up and said, "I'll be teaching you." Njoroge did not like this, but he did not say so. At the beginning of the next year, he was promoted to the third class. It was called Standard 1, for the other two were just preparatory, beginners classes. The second beginners class was found unnecessary for him. Standard 1 was a class that Umwahaki too would attend. Njoroge had caught up with her. He was glad. Before the school opened for the next year, Njoroge went to the forest with Kamawu. After a fruitless search for antelope, he asked, "Why don't you really start school?" "You are always asking this." Kamawu laughed. But Njoroge remained serious. He always thought that schooling was the very best that a boy could have. It was the end of all leaving, and he wanted everyone to go to school. "No," Kamawu continued, as he shook his head. "Why? Now, don't you pretend that you don't know the answer. Can't you see home? A man without land must learn to trade. Father has nothing, so what I'm doing is important. If Nganga was not selfish, I'll soon make a good carpenter. I could be rich, and then we could all help you in school. Your learning is for all of us. Father says the same thing. He's anxious that you go on, so you might bring light to our family. Education is the light of Kenya. That's what Jomo says. Njoroge had heard of Jomo when he came from across the sea. Many people had gone to meet him in Nairobi. Njoroge thought that he would like to learn like Jomo and eventually cross the sea to the land of the white man. And Oaxaca's brother was to go there soon. In the evening, Ngoto glanced up at Njoroge. When will you open school? On Monday. Ah, Ngoto sighed. He now looked past his son. Iyokabi was preparing Irioi. Education is everything, Ngoto said. Yet, he doubted this because he knew deep inside his heart that land was everything. Education was good only because it would lead to the recovery of the lost lands. You must learn to escape the conditions under which we live. It is a hard way. It is not much that a man can do without a piece of land. Ngoto rarely complained. He had all his life lived under the belief that something big will happen. That was why he did not want to be away from the land that belonged to his ancestors. That was really why he had faithfully worked for Mr. Hollands, tending the soil carefully and everything that was in it. His son had come, and with one stroke had made him to doubt that very allegiance to Mr. Hollands and the soil. And with this doubt had now come an old man's fear of his son. Boro had changed. This was all because of the war. Ngoto felt the war had dealt ill with him. It had killed one son, and the other was accusing him. The way Mr. Holland looks at the farm, he said slowly to himself. Ngoto could not quite understand Mr. Holland's devotion to the soil. At times, he looked so lost in it, as if in an escape from something else. Njoroge listened to his father. He instinctively knew that an indefinable demand was made on him, even though he was so young. He knew that for him, education would be the fulfillment of a wider and more significant vision, a vision that embraced the demand made on him, not only by his father, but also by his mother, his brothers, and even the village. He saw himself destined for something big, and this made his heart glow. Weep not, child. Chapter 5. A fairly large hill stood outside Ngoto's household. Years of accumulating rubbish had brought this into being. If you stood there in daytime, you could more or less see the whole of the land of Jacobo. It was very big as a settler's farm. The land was full of paritron flowers and forests of black wattle trees. Jacobo was lucky because he had for many years been the only African allowed to grow pyrethrum. It was said that he had stood in the way of similar permits being given to other people. White farmers who planted it also did not want many Africans to be allowed to grow any cash crops like pyrethrum because this would lower the standards and quality of production. And Njoroge usually stood on this hill whenever he wanted to see his mother or brothers coming from a distance. If he saw any of them, he ran and helped them carry whatever they had. It did not matter if it were Njeri or any of her sons. The feeling of oneness was one thing that most distinguished Ngoto's household from many other polygamous families. Njeri and Nyokabi went to the shamba or market together. Sometimes they agreed among themselves that while one did that job, the other would do this one. This was attributed to Ngoto, the center of the house, for if you have a stable center, then the family will hold. It was the dark night, and Njoroge and Kamau stood on the hill. A few stars twinkled above. They looked like human eyes. Nyokabi had once told Njoroge that those were small holes through which one saw the lighted fire of God. He had not quite believed it. Do you see those distant lights? Yes, that's Nairobi, isn't it? Njoroge's voice trembled silently. Yes, Kamau answered dreamily. Njoroge peered through the darkness and looked beyond. Far away, a multitude of lights could be seen. Above the host of lights was the grey haze of the sky. Njoroge let his eye dwell on the scene. Nairobi, the big city, was a place of mystery that had at last called away his brothers from the family circle. The attraction to this strange city that was near yet far away weakened him. He sighed. He could not yet understand why his brother had just decided to go like that. Do you think that they found jobs? Corey said that jobs there are plenty. I see. It is a big city. Yes, it is a big city. Mr. Holland often goes there, and Jacobo too. Do you think they'll forget home? I'm sure they won't. None can forget home. Why couldn't they work here? Do you think they didn't want to? You know this place. Even there, where they go, they will have to learn that mere salary without a piece of land to cultivate is nothing. Look at Howlands. He is not employed by anybody, yet he is very rich and happy. It's because he has land. Or look at Jacobo. He's like that because he has land. Boro has no land. He could not get employment. You know how bitter he is with father because he says that it is through the stupidity of our fathers that the land has been taken away. Do you think he could stay here? Boro is not of this place. Njoroge pondered this and wished he had been in a position to right the situation. Perhaps education. Yes, Boro was strange. He was often angry with father and all the old generation, and yet they tried to get the land. Yes, father said that people began pressing for their rights a long while back. Some went in a procession to Nairobi soon after the end of the First War to demand the release of their leader who had been arrested. People were shot and three of them died. You see, people thought that the young leader was the one who would make the white man go. Father said this. Father said this? Yes, I found him telling Boro. You know father sort of fears Boro. What did Boro say? Nothing. He just sat there thinking and brooding over something. Boro is queer. Our elder mother says that it was the war that changed him. Some people say, however, that it is something to do with our other brother, the dead one. Ngugi? Yes, they say it is the British who killed him, but whether it was the British or not, it was a white man who did it. Yes, they still peer through the darkness to the city that now held Boro and Kori. Kamau and Njoroge feared that the other two might be lost there. This will end the evening gathering of young men and women, but Kori had clearly said that they will be going home from time to time. I too would like to leave this place. Why? Njoroge quickly asked. Njoroge's train of thought of what he would do for his family when he had money and learning was interrupted. Just a feeling. But first, I must stop working for Nganga. You have not finished the course. I think I know enough carpentry to keep me going. I can now make a chair and bed and things like that. And where will you go? To the settled area or to Nairobi. And Njoroge felt a strong desire to detain Kamau. He will miss him greatly. You may not get a job. I will. But have you forgotten about the strike? Oh, yes. You know the intended strike that father is always talking about. I do not know. I think strike are for people like my father. But father says that the strike is for all people who want freedom of the black people. Maybe. I cannot tell. They heard Njeri calling. They went down the hill. As they went along, Njoroge remembered something he had wanted to ask about land. Do you think it's true what father says, that all the land belongs to black people? Yes, black people have their land in the country of black people. White people have their land in their own country. It is simple. I think it was God's plan. Are there black people in England? No, England is for white people only. And they all left their country to come and rob us acres of what we have? Yes, they are robbers. All of them? Yes, even Mr. Holland. Mr. Holland? I don't like him. I did not like the way his son followed me once. A lamb takes after its mother. Something occurred to him. Jacobo is a bad man. Do you think, He stopped. Then he quickly changed the subject and asked, Who is Jomo? Boro called him the Black Moses. In the Bible? I don't know. I think I've heard about that in the Bible. And Jerry's voice rang through the darkness. There was no more talk. That night, Njoroge stayed in bed for a little while before sleeping. Njoroge did not want to be like his father, working for the white man, or worse, for an Indian. Father had said that the work was hard and had asked him to escape from the same conditions. Yes, he would. He would be different, and he would help all his brothers. Before he went to sleep, he prayed, Lord, let me get learning. I want to help my father and mothers, and Kamawu and all my other brothers. I ask you all this through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. He remembered something else, and help me God, so that Nwahaki would not beat me in class. And God, he fell asleep and dreamed of education in England. Nwahaki was always pleased with Njoroge. She felt more secure with him than she felt with her brothers, who did not care much about her. She confided in him and liked walking home with him. She was quite clever and held her own even among boys. And now that Njoroge was in her class, she could ask him questions about classwork. It was in Standard 4 that they began to learn English. Lucia, Nwahaki's sister, taught them. They all sat expectantly at their desks with their eyes on the board. A knowledge of English was a criterion of a man's learning. Stand. Raguma. Teacher, I am standing. What am I doing? Class, you are standing up. Teacher, again. Class, you are standing up. Teacher, pointing with a finger. You. No, you. Yes. What's your name? People. Njoroge. Teacher. Njoroge, stand up. He stood up. Learning English was alright, but not when he stood up for all eyes to watch and maybe make faces at him. Teacher, what are you doing? Njoroge, thinly, you are standing up. Teacher, slightly cross, what are you doing? Njoroge clears his throat, voice thinner still, you are standing up. Teacher, no, no, to the class, come on, what are you doing? Njoroge was very confused. Hands were raised up all around him. He felt more and more foolish, so that, in the end, he gave up the very attempt to answer. Teacher, pointing to Nwahaki, stand up. What are you doing? Head bent onto one shoulder. I am standing up. Teacher, good. Now, Njoroge, what is she doing? Njoroge, I am standing up. The class giggled. Teacher, very annoyed. Class, what is she doing? Class, singing. You are standing up. Teacher, still very angry. I am asking you, what is she doing? Class, afraid, quietly singing. You are standing up. Teacher, look here, you stupid and lazy fools. How long do you take to catch things? Didn't we go over all this yesterday? If I come tomorrow and find that you make a single mistake, I'll punish you severely. With this sharply delivered threat, she walked out. Njoroge, annoyed with himself at his poor showing, could now be heard trying to re-establish himself by telling them what they ought to have answered. She is standing up. But one boy, the most stupid in the class, rebuked him. Why didn't you speak up when she was here, if you are so clever? After some more weeks of anger and threats, the children managed to glimpse something of which they were proud. Njoroge could now sing, I am standing up. You are standing up. She is standing up. We are standing up. You are standing up. They are standing up. Where are you going? I am going to the door. We are going to the door. Point to the blackboard. What are you doing? I am pointing to the board. When a teacher came into the class, he greeted them in English. Teacher, good morning, children. Class, standing up, singing the answer, good morning, sir. One day, a European woman came to the school. As she was expected, the school had been cleaned and put in good order. The children had been told to show how to behave. Njoroge had not seen many Europeans at very close quarters. He was now quite overawed by the whiteness and tenderness of the woman's skin. He wondered, what will I feel if I touch her skin? When she entered, the whole class stood up at attention. She had already opened their mouths to answer the expected greetings. Good afternoon, children. Good morning, sir. Lucia felt like crying. Had she not told them the correct thing over and over again? She had been let down. The visitor was explaining that since it was after lunch, after 12 o'clock, they should talk of good afternoon, and since she was a woman, they should call her Madame. All right. Yes, sir. Madame, shouted Lucia, almost hysterically. She could have killed someone. Yes, Madame. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Madame. But some still clung to say. It had come to be part of their way of greeting. Even when one people greeted another, say accompanied the answer. When the European went away, the children regretted the incident. Lucia bid them to cool her rage and shame. In future, they were to know the difference between a morning and an afternoon, and that between a sir and a madame. Yes, madame. As they went home, Njoroge said to Wahaki, you know, I had a feeling that I've seen that woman somewhere. Have you? Where? I don't know. It was just a feeling. They came to the place where Ngoto worked. She said, do you still see the boy? No, I think he has gone to school. Did he ever try to speak to you again? No, I've always avoided him, but he's always so alone. Perhaps he has no brothers and sisters. He can go and play with other children. Where? They had gone only a few yards when Njoroge exclaimed, I know. What? Where I have seen that woman. I have seen her once or twice in Mr. Holland's place. I think it's their daughter. Father says she is a mission woman. Oh, yes, I've heard Father say the same thing. I wonder why she turned missionary. She's a settler's daughter. Perhaps she's different. Kamau's proverb had just come into his mind. He felt clever. Kamau left Nganga and took a job with another carpenter at the African shops. He did not go to Nairobi or the settled area as he intimated. Njoroge had won, but he saw that Kamau was growing into a big kihi, now ready for circumcision. Njoroge watched him with fear. When Kamau was initiated, he would probably walk with men of his rika, but this was not just what he feared. After all, even now, they were not very much together. What he feared was that, one day, Kamau might be drawn into the city. The other brothers had been called, though they might come home quite regularly, yet they were changing. This was especially true of Corey. Kamau's going would lead to the final family breakup and ruin the cozy security which one felt in thinking of home. Kamal was the man of home. He seemed to carry the family dumbly on his shoulders. And Njoroge sometimes went to the African shops to see him. The place was always the same. Men of all sorts hanging around the tea shops and slaughterhouses, idling away the hours. The drudgery of such a life made him fear a future that held in store such purposeless living and weariness. He clung to the books and whatever the school had to offer, and Njoroge was now fairly tall, black-haired and brown-skinned, with clear large eyes. His features were clear and well-defined, but perhaps too set for a boy of his age. Education for him, as for many boys of his generation, held the key to the future, as he could not find any companionship with Jacobo's children, except in Wahaki, for this belonged to the middle class that was rising and beginning to be conscious of itself as such. He turned to reading. He read anything that came his way. The Bible was his favorite book. He liked the stories of the Old Testament. He loved and admired David, often identifying himself with this hero. The book of Job attracted him, though it often gave rise to a painful stirring in his heart. In the New Testament, he liked the story of the young Jesus and the Sermon on the Mountain. And Njoroge came to place faith in the Bible, and with his vision of an educated life in the future, was blended a belief in the righteousness of God. Equity and justice were there in the world. If you did well and remained faithful to your God, the kingdom of heaven will be yours. A good man will get a reward from God. A bad man will harvest bad fruits. The tribal stories told him by his mother had strengthened this belief in the virtue of toil and perseverance. His belief in a future for his family and the village rested then not only on a hope for sound education, but also on a belief in a God of love and mercy, who long ago walked on this earth with Gikuyu and Mambi, or Adam and Eve. It did not make much difference that he had come to identify Gikuyu with Adam and Mambi with Eve. To this God, all men and women were united by one strong bond of brotherhood. And with all this, there was growing up in his heart a feeling that Gikuyu people, whose land had been taken by the white men, were no other than the children of Israel, about whom he read in the Bible. So, although all men were brothers, the black people had a special mission to the world because they were the chosen people of God. This explained his brother's remark that Jomo was the black Moses. Whenever he was with Iwahaki, he longed to impart some of these things to her, yet when he tried to define them in words, he failed. So he kept them all to himself, walking alone in the fields and sometimes finding companionship with the nines. Weep Not Child, Chapter 6. Sometimes men came to see his father. Ever since Njoroge was a child, he had seen Ngoto as the center of everything. As long as he lived, nothing could go wrong. And so, Njoroge grew up fearing his father, and yet putting implicit faith in him. The men who came to see Ngoto usually went to his tengira, but sometimes they went to Yokabi or Yeri's hut. This pleased Njoroge, for he loved to listen to the mature talk of men. These men were the leaders of the village. They talk about affairs of the land. Kori and Borotu brought men at weekends, but these men were different from the young men of the village. The young men of the village usually allowed the elders to lead talks while they listened, but these others who came with Kori and Boro from the big city seemed to know a lot of things. They usually dominated the talks, and because most of them had been to the war, they were able to compare affairs of the land with the lands to which they had been. They did not joke and laugh as young men usually did, but their faces were grave as they talked of the foreign lands, the war, their country, the big unemployment, and the stolen lands. Njoroge listened keenly as they talked of Jomo. Already, he felt intimate with this man, for Njoroge was sure that he had read about him in the Old Testament. Moses had led the children of Israel from Missouri to the Promised Land, and because black people were really the children of Israel, Moses was no other than Jomo himself. It was obvious. The men talked of the strike. All men who worked for the white men and Serikali, the government, would come out on strike. The government and the settlers had to be shown that black people were not cowards and slaves. They too had children to feed and to educate. Kiari, a short man with a black beard, was a good, compelling speaker. He usually worked together with Boro. His words stirred Njoroge strangely. A man asked, "But do you think it will succeed?" "Yes, everybody will go on strike. Every black man everywhere, even those in the police and the army, will sit down too." "Shall we really get the same pay as Indians and Europeans?" "Yes," Kiari explained with a confident nod of his head. "All black people will stop working. All businesses in the country will come to a standstill because all the country depends on our sweat. The government and the settlers will call us back, but we shall say, 'No, no, give us more money first.' Our sweat and blood are not so cheap. We too are humans. We cannot live on 15 shillings a month." The old men and village folk listened with deep interest. They did not know much about strikes, but if it meant more money, it was a good idea. The solemn voice of Kiari had conviction and quiet assurance, which Njoroge felt gave courage and faith to all those around. What about those employed by black people? "We must concentrate on the government and the white people. We black people are brothers." Ongoto knew one or two who were certainly not brothers, but he did not say so. When Njoroge went to bed, he prayed that the strike be a success. He hoped it would come soon. If his father had much money, he could buy a lorry like that one of Jacobo. He slept and dreamed of the happy moment of wealth and pleasure after the strike. Mr. Howlands called all his men. This was unusual, but he had not much to say because he did not want to waste time. He just warned them that if any man went on strike, he would instantly lose his job. How could he allow a dam strike to interfere with any part of his farm? Even the government could not interfere with this. The blacks could ask and agitate for anything. Such things were clearly affairs of the government, affairs that stood outside his chamber. Yet, paradoxically, as the strike approached, he wanted a strong government action, an action that would teach these laborers their rightful places. Ongoto listened to the warning without apparent emotion. His face did not change, and so you could not tell what he was really thinking. He could not quite make up his mind about the strike. He doubted if the strike would be a success. If it failed, then he would lose the job, and that would keep him away from the lands of his ancestors. This was wrong, for the land was his. None could tend it as he could. Ongoto went home unsure. He went through the African shops. The barber was still at his job. These days, he mostly talked about the strike. Ongoto did not go there. He went straight home. Njoroge had never seen his father quarreling with his wife. Whenever there was a quarrel, the children were not allowed to know about it. So, when Njoroge came home from school and found Yukabi crying, he was shocked. He could remember vaguely only one time when his mother cried. It was probably during the famine of cassava or earlier. That was now a dream. But this was not a dream. Njoroge stood shocked still, too frightened to enter the house. Ongoto, tall, masculine in spite of age, stood in front of her. Njoroge could not see his face, but he could see the tear-washed face of Yokabi. Fear gripped him as he witnessed the real discord in the home that had hitherto been so secure. "I must be a man in my own house." "Yes, be a man and lose a job." "I shall do whatever I like. I have never taken orders from a woman." "We shall starve." "You starve. This strike is important for the black people. We shall get bigger salaries." "What's black people to us when we starve?" "Shut that mouth. How long do you think I can endure this drudgery? For the sake of a white man and his children?" "But he's paying you money. What if the strike fails?" "Don't woman me," he shouted hysterically. This possibility was what he feared the most. She sensed this tone of uncertainty and fear and seized upon it. "What if the strike fails? Tell me that." Ongoto could bear it no longer. She was driving him mad. He slapped her on the face and raised his hand again. But Njoroge now found his voice. He ran forward and cried frantically, "Please, father." Ongoto stopped. He looked at his son. He ran towards him and grabbed him by the shoulder. Njoroge felt the grip and winced with fear. Ongoto growled something inaudibly. Then he suddenly released the boy and turned his eyes away. He walked out. "Mother," Njoroge whispered to Yukabi, "why have they bewitched him? My man is changed. Please, mother." But she went on sobbing. Njoroge felt lonely. Something heavy and cold oppressed him in the stomach. Even the stars that later shone in the night gave him no comfort. He walked across the courtyard, not afraid of the darkness. He wished that Nwahaki was with him. Then he might have confided in her. In the distance, the gleaming lights of the city, where the call of the strike had been born, beckoned to him. He did not respond. He just wanted to be lost in the darkness, for he could not judge between a father and a mother. In his bed, he knelt down and prayed, "God, forgive me, for I am wicked. Perhaps it is me who has brought uncleanness into our home. Forgive me my sins. Help my father and my mother. Oh, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, help thy children. Forgive us all. Amen." Lord, do you think the strike will be a success? He wanted an assurance. He wanted to foretake the future before it came. In the Old Testament, God spoke to his people. Surely he could do the same thing now. So Njoroge listened, seriously and quietly. He was still listening when he fell asleep. Weep Not Child, Chapter 7. It was at the beginning of New Year. The room was packed, for the whole class had come to know whether they had passed or not. Njoroge sat in a corner, silent, and Wahaki too was there. She was growing into quite a big girl. Certainly, she was not the same who 5 years back had taken Njoroge to school. The two had shared each other's hopes and fears, and he felt akin to her. He always wished she had been his sister. A boy chatted and shouted in a corner, but his friends did not play. The boy sat down again, while two others regarded him coldly. One or two others laughed, but the laughter was rather subdued. Though they sat in groups, each was alone. That was all. Teacher Isaka came in with a long sheet of paper. Everybody was quiet. Njoroge had prepared himself for this moment. He had many times told himself that he would not change even if he failed. He had tried his best, but now, when the teacher began to look at a long white sheet, he wanted to go and hide under the desk. And then he heard his name. It was topping the list. Nwahaki too had passed. Together, they ran homewards, linking their hands. They did not talk. Each wanted to reach home and tell their parents the good news. Njoroge wanted his mother to know that her son had not failed. He would now go to an intermediate school. They came near Nwahaki's house and there stood for a moment, holding each other's hands. Then they let go of the hands and each now ran on a different path towards home. When Nwahaki reached home earlier, she found her mother and all the other children of the family crowded together. She did not see anything strange in this because she was excited. "Mother, mother, what is it?" She stopped. The voice of her mother was cold, sad, and distant. Julian looked past Nwahaki and then, almost in a hostile and impatient manner, continued, "What else has happened? Speak, or why do you come home rushing so?" "Nothing," Nwahaki said quietly. "Only that I have passed." There was no pride of achievement in her voice. "Is that all? Is your sister Lucia at school?" Then Julian burst out sobbing, speaking to herself. "I have always told him to take that man away from the land. I have always said that such a hoy was dangerous, but a man will never heed the voice of a woman until it is too late. I told him not to go, but he would not listen." "What happened?" "Mother," Onwahaki asked anxiously. "Oh, well may you ask. I've always said that your father will end up by being murdered. Is he dead? Nwahaki burst out crying. Nobody reassured her. Meanwhile, Njoroge had reached home. A group of men and women and children were standing in the courtyard. Some eyes were turned to his father's hut. The others were turned towards the marketplace. But where was his mother? He found her inside her hut. She sat on a low stool, and two women of the village sat close to her. They kept dumb. Their eyes were turned to the courtyard. And Yokabe's face was dark, and now and then so shook her. And Njoroge's joy of a victorious homecoming faded. What is it, mother? He feared that someone had died. His mother looked up and saw him. And Njoroge trembled. Outside, more men and women streamed into the courtyard. Some spoke in low voices. It's the strike, a woman told him. And then, of course, Njoroge remembered. Today was the day of the strike. The strike that was meant to paralyze the whole country. Many people had gone to the meeting, which was being held on the first day of the strike. They had streamed into the meeting ground like safari ants. All knew that it was a great day for the black people. Ongoto too had gone to the meeting. Who could tell? But the meeting might open the doors to better things. And would it have paid to be in Holland's employment when the time for settlement of things came? That was how he comforted himself, because Nyokabe's words were still in his mind. The barber came and sat next to him. All the time, the barber kept up an incessant chatter that made the people laugh. The speakers had come from Nairobi, and among them were Boro and Kiari. Boro had not found a permanent job in Nairobi, but had gone into politics. Ngoto felt a certain pride in seeing his son sitting with such big folk. He was now glad that he had come. Kiari spoke first, in a low, sad voice, and recounted history. All the land belonged to the people, black people. They had been given it by God, for every race had their country. The Indians had India, Europeans had Europe, and Africans had Africa, the land of black people. Who did not know that all the soil in this part of the country had been given to Gikuyu and Mambi and their posterity? More applause. He told them how the land had been taken away through the Bible and the sword. Yes, that's how your land was taken away. The Bible paved way for the sword. For this, he blamed the foolish generosity of their forefathers who pitied the stranger and welcomed him with open arms into their fold. Later, our fathers were taken captives in the first big war to help a war whose cause they never knew. And when they came back, their land had been taken away for a settlement of the white soldiers. Was that fair? No. Our people were taken and forced to work for these settlers. How could they have done otherwise when their land had been taken and they and their wives were required to pay heavy taxes to a government that was not theirs? When people rose to demand their rights, they were shut down. But still, the Serikali and the settlers were not satisfied. When the second big war came, we were taken to fight Hitler. Hitler who had not wronged us. We were killed. We shed blood to save the British Empire from defeat and collapse. God had now heard their cries and tribulations. There was a man sent from God whose name was Jomo. He was the black Moses, empowered by God to tell the white Pharaoh, "Let my people go." And that's what we have gathered here to tell the British. Today, we, with one voice, must rise and shout, "The time has come. Let my people go. Let my people go. We want back our land now." Hysterical applaud. Ongoto felt a hollow strafe in his stomach. It fixed him to the ground so that he could not applaud. He looked from the ground and saw the shouting and applauding figures. But there was something in the mist. He saw blurred images. Was he crying? The images around transformed themselves from something grey to blue and then to total black. There were black sweaters. He cleared his eyes. The black sweaters remained there, now approaching. And then he saw. This was not a dream. The police had surrounded the whole meeting. Kiari was now speaking in a loud voice. Remember, this must be a peaceful strike. We must get more pay. Because right is on our side, we shall triumph. If today you are hit, don't hit back. A white police inspector had gone up on the platform, and with him, Jacobo. At first, Ongoto could not understand. It was all strange. It was only when Jacobo had begun to speak and was urging the people to go back to work and not listen to some people from Nairobi who had nothing to lose if people lost their jobs that Ongoto understood. Jacobo, the richest man in all the land around, had been brought to pacify the people. Everyone listened to him in silence, but something unusual happened to Ungoto. For one single moment, Jacobo crystallized into a concrete betrayal of the people. He became the physical personification of the long years of waiting and suffering. Jacobo was a traitor. Ungoto rose. He made his way towards the platform, while everyone watched, wondering what was happening. He was now near Jacobo. The battle now was between these two, Jacobo on the side of the white people, and he on the side of the black people. All this happened quickly and took the people by surprise. And then, all of a sudden, as if led by Ngoto, the crowd rose and rushed toward Jacobo. At once, the police acted, throwing tear gas bombs and firing into the crowd, and two men fell as the panic-stricken mob scattered. Ngoto's courage now failed him. He was lost in the crowd, so he ran blindly, not knowing whither. He wanted only to save his life. A police struck him at his face with a baton and drew blood, but he did not stop. He was not really aware of the blood. He felt it only as something warm. Frantically, he ran until he was in the clear, then stumbled forward and fell, losing consciousness. That was where the people from his village found him, the hero of the hour. They took him home. Is he going to die? Njoroge asked Kamau after hearing the story. No, it is not very serious, but I think he lost much blood. Why did he do it? I mean, attack Jacobo. I don't know. We just saw him rise, and when near Jacobo, he turned around and shouted to us all, "Arise!" I think he was mad with emotion, but then so were we all. I didn't know that father could have such a voice. A small silence fell between them. Kamau seemed to be recollecting the scene. Some men and women were beginning to move from the courtyard. Why did Jacobo do that? He is an enemy of the black people. He doesn't want others to be rich as he is. How did Jacobo become involved? That was a question that few could answer with much certainty. Few knew that, to the government and the settlers around, Jacobo, being a rich man, had a lot of influence on the people. Jacobo had, of course, impressed this on the local white community, including Mr. Holland, who had not taken him seriously until the hour of need. Jacobo was a convenience man. The police had called him to their aid, and Jacobo could not have refused. For a time, he had thought himself successful. Then, this damned Ngoto had come and spoiled everything. Jacobo was not seriously hurt. The police had acted in time. Otherwise, he would have been torn to pieces. While it lasted, it had been like death itself. He wished he had listened to the voice of his wife. At the barber's shop was a large crowd of people. The barber, who had sat next to Ngoto, was retelling the whole incident. This was a few days after the affair. The old man is brave. He is that to be sure. Was he badly hurt? No, except that much blood came out. Why did he do it? His action caused the death of two men. Ah, who could not have done as he did? I sat next to him, and I would have done the same thing. I would have been alright if it had been a white man, but a black man like you and I. It shows that we black people will never be united. There must always be a traitor in our midst. That's true. That's true. Several voices agreed. There be some people everywhere who don't want to see others rise. The young man who was being trimmed put in. Then the barber took up. You have said the truth. Jacobo is rich. You all know that he is the first black man to be allowed to grow pyrethrum. Do you think he would like to see another one near him? And how? Anyway, do you think he was allowed what had been denied the rest? No one could answer. Then the barber stopped the machine for a while. In a wise manner, he declared, "It's because he promised them to sell us." Yes, yes. Again, several voices agreed. A middle aged man with a bald head sadly shook his head and said, "All the same, it's sad what happened to Ngoto. He has been told to leave Jacobo's land." Leave Jacobo's land? Yes, but Jacobo found him there when he bought the land from the previous owner. It is his land. He can do what he likes with it. The man who said this was a modern young man who had joined the group. People turned to him angrily, but it was not against the custom. Besides, the previous owner never actually sold the site to Jacobo. A policeman was seen in the distance. The crowd quickly disappeared. The barber was left alone. By now, many people knew that the strike had failed. Ongoto was given a place to build by Nganga. It was then that Njoroge realized that the man's rough exterior and apparent lack of scruple concealed a warm heart. His whole hatred for Nganga vanished. Even Kamau could now speak of him with enthusiasm. But all this was a hard period for Njoroge. New hearts meant more money being spent, and Ngoto had lost his job in the settled area. Fees had risen for those who went to Standard 5 in the new school. Besides, there was building funds to be paid. The new school would soon be built with stone. Njoroge had no money. Owahaki had gone to a boarding school for girls far away. She would go on learning, but he, Njoroge, would stop. This hurt him. Day by day he prayed. What would he do to realize his vision? On the Monday of the third week, he was sent home. On his way, he cried. God heard his prayers. Kamau's wages had been raised to 30 shillings. This he gives to Njoroge. The rest was made up by Kori. Njoroge was glad. He would go on with learning. Weep not, child. Interlude. Exactly 2.5 years later, on a certain hill overlooking Nairobi, there stood a disillusioned government official. He was all alone, looking at the country he would soon be leaving. Why do you stand there amazed? I did not know that this would come to be. But you saw the signs? No, I didn't. You did. I didn't. But I tell you I didn't. We tried our best. He walked away, stamping his feet angrily on the ground. And to think of all we did for them, he said. The damn city he and others of his kind had helped to create looked at him. There was no comfort from the corner, the very center of the trouble. Have you heard, brother? No, but you have not asked me what. My children cry for food. But don't you want to hear what happened in Muranga? Oh, Muranga, that's far away. A chief has been killed. Oh, is that all? My wife is waiting for me. But it's all interesting. I'll come down in the evening for the story. All right, do. Other people are coming. I have a wireless set. My wife calls. Stay in peace. Go in peace. He was a big chief, like Jacobo. No, bigger. He used to eat with the governor. Was he actually killed in daylight? Yes, the men were very daring. Tell us it all again. Woman, add more wood to the fire and light the lantern, for darkness falls. Now, the chief was a big man with much land. The governor had given it all to him, so he might sell the black people. The men were in the car. The chief was also in the car. The two men followed him all the way from Nairobi. When they reached the countryside, the men drove ahead and waved the chief to stop. He stopped. Who is the chief? I am. Then take that and that too. They shot him dead and drove away. In daylight? In daylight, the man on the wireless said so. This generation, very daring. They have learned the trick from the white man. It's almost time for news. Let's hear what the man would say. Hush! One night, people heard that Jomo and all the leaders of the land were arrested. A state of emergency had been declared. But they cannot arrest Jomo, said the Baba. They cannot. They want to leave people without a leader. Yes, they are after oppressing us, said the Baba. He did not speak with the usual lively tone. What's a state of emergency? A man asked. Oh, don't ask a foolish question. Haven't you heard about Malaya? What about it? There was a state of emergency. And Njoroge was a little annoyed when he heard about Jomo's arrest. He had cherished the idea of seeing this man, who had become famous all over Kenya. He could still remember a meeting arranged in the marketplace by KAU. It was many months after the strike had failed. KAU was a society of black people who wanted Wiyati and the return of the stolen lands. The society also wanted bigger salaries for the black people and the abolition of Calabar. And Njoroge had heard about the Calabar from his brothers in Nairobi. He did not know what it was really, but he knew that the strike had failed because of the Calabar. Black people had no lands because of the Calabar, and they could not eat in hotels because of the Calabar. Calabar was everywhere. Rich Africans could also practice Calabar on the poorer Africans. And Njoroge had gone early to the market, but he had found that many people had already reached the place and blocked his view. All right, he will see him next time. But now, Jomo had been arrested.